this morning's presentation the title, We Are All One. And I see this as one of the great teachings of all the non-dual schools of Hinduism, like Advaita Vedanta and Kashmir Shaivism. Everything is Brahman, everything is Shiva. This morning, I will try to show that we can derive a very similar teaching from the world's great dual traditions and also from science. And my approach will be through the study of the implications of the origin of the universe. This question of origins, of where we and everything we experience or know about has come from, has pervaded all of the world's great systems of thought. It's a question that has a great bearing on our understanding of ourselves and of the meaning of our lives. And it's also a question to which the answer is not self-evident. So we will look at the portrayal of origins in non-dual Hinduism, in the Abrahamic traditions of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, and in modern science. As we shall see, the pictures of origins that have developed in all these systems, diverse as they may be, lead us to the same profound conclusion about the nature of the material universe and everything that is in it. That fundamentally, it is all of the same origin and of the same nature. And this points to the perspective given in the title, that we are all one. So let me set the stage for our discussion by reading from the famous Nasadiya Sukta of the Rig Veda. Here's the opening and the closing of this remarkable hymn about origins, as rendered by Wendy Doniger in her translation of around 100 of the 1,028 hymns of the Rig Veda. There was neither non-existence nor existence then. There was neither the realm of space nor the sky which is beyond. What stirred? Where? In whose protection? And at the end, it says, who really knows? The gods came afterwards with the creation of this universe. Who then knows whence it has arisen? Whence this creation has arisen? Perhaps it formed itself, or perhaps it did not. The one who looks down on it in the highest heavens, only he knows. Or perhaps he does not know. Right? This is a really striking account of origins, isn't it? Of the beginning of the whole of creation. It asks the question, whence this creation has arisen, in a powerful way, but it does not give us an answer. It leaves the origin as a mystery for us to ponder. Perhaps the single most widely adopted outcome of this pondering is central to the non-dual schools of Hinduism. Advaita Vedanta and related schools all teach that the material universe is an aspect, a manifestation of the non-material, eternal, infinite, divine. It has the properties of being transient rather than eternal, and of being composed of finite forms rather than being an infinite expanse, but nevertheless, it is fundamentally an aspect of the divine. It is not a separate creation. Here is the major part of a presentation of this non-dual understanding that I find quite magnificent. It's from the Shvetashvatara Upanishad, rendered by Swami Prabhavananda and Frederick Manchester for the Vedanta Society of Southern California way back in 1948. Has been available ever since. O Brahman Supreme, formless art thou, and yet, though the reason none knows, thou bringest forth many forms. Thou art the fire, thou art the sun, thou art the air, thou art the moon, thou art the starry firmament. Thou art Brahman Supreme, thou art the waters, thou the creator of all. Thou art woman, thou art man, thou art the youth, thou art the maiden, thou art the old man with his staff, thou facest everywhere. Thou art the dark butterfly, thou art the green parrot with red eyes. Thou art the thundercloud, the seasons, the seas. Beginning art thou, beyond time, beyond space. Thou alone art. Thou, the light imperishable, adorable. Great glory is thy name. No one is there beside thee, no one equal to thee. Nature in all its beauty is Brahman. All of life on earth is Brahman. All the stars and galaxies are Brahman. And in everyday life, when we talk with each other like this morning, at heart, it is Brahman talking with Brahman. In this way, the non-dual schools of Hinduism are founded on and really eloquently expound the principle that is reflected also in the title of the discourse. We are all one. And they do it in the most elevated way possible. Not only are we all one, the fundamental nature of everything that exists is divine. So let us go on a similar exploration from the perspective of the dual traditions. There are many of them, but I know Christianity best because that was the active path for my family for many generations. And I will draw on the words of the Bible, both Jewish and Christian. The Quran refers to the same creation story, but it does not present it in detail, and it's really beyond my scope. So I will not include Islam in this morning's discussion. The creation story constitutes the very beginning of the Bible, starting with verse 1 of chapter 1. I see that as a mark of the importance of creation in the framing of Jewish and Christian beliefs and traditions. Here are the opening words as presented in a modern translation of the Jewish Bible that was first published in 1985. When God began to create heaven and earth, the earth being unformed and void, with darkness on the surface of the deep, and a wind from God sweeping over the water, God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. God saw that the light was good, and God separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening, and there was morning, a first day. In this way, the Bible tells us, God first created light in what had formerly been nothing but darkness, and created days and nights. Then he created the sky and its lights, and then the dry land separated from the primordial waters, and then plants and animals, and ultimately man and woman. God repeatedly called what he had created good. In 6 days, his work was complete. And the text describes the completion of creation in this way. And God blessed the seventh day and declared it holy, because on it God ceased from all the work of creation that he had done. Such is the story of heaven and earth when they were created. It's a very clear story, starting with the very opening words given in most Christian translations as, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." This story has been a guiding lantern in Judaism and Christianity throughout their history. We and the world we live in are God's creation. So here's how I see the implications of what we have encountered thus far. The non-dual schools of Hinduism say that nothing exists that is not an aspect of God himself. Thou alone art. Everything there is has a shared divine origin and a shared fundamental identity as divine. The Bible says that everything there is was originally created by God. Nothing exists that is not God's creation. Thus, once again, everything there is has a shared divine origin and a shared fundamental nature, this time as God's creation. Both traditions then say that everything there is has a divine origin. Both traditions say that everything there is has a shared fundamental nature. The difference between them is that the non-dual traditions say that the fundamental nature of everything is being an aspect of the divine, whereas the dual traditions say that the fundamental nature of everything is that everything is God's creation. So let us now turn to science. It's often assumed that science is at odds with spiritual traditions, that it is replacing them with a different kind of understanding. And it is certainly true that the way science searches for the truth is different from that of spirituality. We scientists do not rely on prayer or on meditation or on acts of devotion to gain a new scientific understanding. Science does not, at least at present, include divinity as an aspect of the universe. Rather, it considers all of existence to be material in nature. There are many, many scientists who lead deep spiritual lives in a variety of traditions and accept a non-material divine for themselves. But science itself does not include that. And yet, look at what science tells us about the universe. The prevailing scientific picture of the origin of the first day is of an incredible moment when all of existence, which had manifested as an immeasurably tiny speck, suddenly burst forth and ultimately became the entire universe we know. Here's a description of this so-called Big Bang from the highly distinguished astrophysicist Alan Lightman, who for many years headed a research program at Harvard, and he moved to MIT as a professor not only of physics, but also of writing, and more recently has stepped out of academia to devote himself to writing. Lightman describes himself as a spiritual materialist, and he often shares his spiritual experiences. The words that follow are taken from his recent book, Searching for Stars on an Island in Maine. Continuing back and strictly following the findings of science, all the stars in the sky were once nebulous clouds of gas. The further back in time, the hotter and denser. All the atoms were once too hot to hold their electrons. And before that, the nuclei of atoms were too hot to hold their constituent protons and neutrons. All the matter in the universe was once pure energy. And that energy, the stuff that made the entire observable universe today, was once crammed, churning and screaming, into a region smaller than a single atom. That was the Big Bang, the origin of all origins. Or maybe not. Or maybe not. Lightman's words take us back to the Nasadiya Sukta, don't they? And let me also share with you the human implications of the Big Bang Theory. In the words of Maria Popova, a remarkable immigrant from Bulgaria who has devoted her life for the past 20 years to writing, to literary criticism, and to a variety of ways of bringing literature to greater prominence in the American popular world. These words are taken from a book of hers that has just appeared entitled The Universe in Verse, 15 Portals to Wonder Through Science and Poetry. So she writes, it, meaning the Big Bang and its consequences, is an incomprehensible notion for the human mind to grasp. The human mind, itself made of atoms that were once part of particular stars, now constellating into molecules and cells firing electrical charges between neurons at 80 feet per second to produce the spark of thought. Thought that cannot apprehend how everything we know, everything there ever was and ever will be, was once compressed into a sizeless, senseless dot. To come to terms with this elemental fact is to see ourselves, our inheritance, and our interbelonging, our insignificance and our sanctity, with cleansed eyes, lensed with wonder and tenderness. Wonder and tenderness. And Maria dedicates her book to her friend Emily in these words. For Emily, who returned her borrowed stardust to the universe far too soon. Returned her borrowed stardust to the universe far too soon. The main schools of Hinduism tell us that everything that exists is but an aspect of the infinite divine. The Bible tells us that everything that exists was created by God. Science tells us that everything that exists is the product of a single explosive event, the Big Bang. Whichever story we most adhere to, or which combination of stories, it teaches us that the lives we live today, the people we love, the beautiful nature all around us, the sun, the moon, the stars, everything that exists in the entirety of the universe has a single origin, in at least this sense, coming from a single source. We are all one. As we come to a close this morning, let us explore how the spiritual sources of this unifying proposition intertwine with the scientific. In Hindu tradition, science and spirit were never separated. Important classical science in Bharat was done within the context of Hinduism. A fascinating account of this history has been presented by Professor Alok Kumar, who has also spoken in this Discourse series. About 20 years back, Alok published a study of several hundred pages and highly detailed documentation entitled Sciences of the Ancient Hindus. In 2020, he published a considerably shorter version entitled Ancient Hindu Science, Its Impact on the Ancient and Modern Worlds. Let me read you an overview paragraph from Sciences of the Ancient Hindus. Science was institutionalized among the ancient Hindus. It was considered sacred and as good as their moral codes for society. Scientific activities had important functions that were valued in society. The role of astronomers to fix the calendar, to set dates of religious festivals, and to predict eclipses and other astronomical events became as important as their moral codes. All forms of knowledge, including science, music, and art, were considered sacred by the Hindus. Thus, in the Hindu religion, a person could achieve salvation by mastering physics, chemistry, astronomy, medicine, or music. Sciences and the fine arts were bound to prosper among the Hindus, and they did. I mean, the accomplishments are absolutely amazing. That was in ancient times. Science is very, very present in the Hindu community of today. After all, most of you are in fields that have a major scientific component. But it is also in the life and thoughts of Hindus who are in no way scientists themselves. A really striking example is Rabindranath Tagore. You probably know that Tagore was awarded the Nobel Prize for Literature back in 1913 and was the first non-Westerner ever to be awarded this honor. In 1930, he was invited to deliver that year's Hibbert Lectures, a series established in 1887 within the Unitarian community of Christians in England, in Britain. He delivered his speeches at one of the colleges of Oxford University. And even today, Tagore figures prominently in the public image of the Hibbert Trust. If you go to their website, there he is on page 1. The title of the book that resulted from his Hibbert Lectures is The Religion of Man. I have a very special attachment to it because Yvonne and I bought our copy and stationery store on Connaught Place in New Delhi, just a few months after we were married. Here is how the book begins. Chapter 1, titled Man's Universe. Light, as the radiant energy of creation, started the ring dance of atoms in a diminutive sky, and also the dance of the stars in the vast lonely theater of time and space. The planets came out of their bath of fire and basked in the sun for ages. Then came a time when life was brought into the arena in the tiniest little monocycle of a cell. But the miracle of creation did not stop here in this isolated speck of life launched on a lonely journey to the unknown. A multitude of cells were bound together into a larger unit, not through aggregation, but through a marvelous quality of complex interrelationship, maintaining a perfect coordination of functions, like a living organism. This is the creative principle of unity, the divine mystery of existence that baffles all analysis. So, it's clearly referring to the Big Bang. The Big Bang theory was first published in April of 1927, and it immediately became highly controversial. Tagore spoke in May of 1930, a mere 3 years later. Right? So he was in no way repeating something he might have learned in school. Rather, the way he opened his own lectures reflects the seriousness of his thinking and his readiness to incorporate ideas and findings emerging within the sciences. As Alok Kumar wrote about the ancients, science and Hinduism are very active partners in the modern world. When it comes to Christianity, it is often assumed that there is and always has been a deep conflict between faith and science. And that is true for some Christians, and it has received a lot of publicity, but it is emphatically not true in general. In fact, for the better part of 1,000 years of church history, the study of nature was regarded as a way to God, much as in Hinduism. Here is a description from a journal called Perspectives on Science and Christian Faith, a whole journal devoted to this topic. The relationship between the revelation of God through nature and through scripture is here studied, referring to the opening of an article, is here studied by focusing on the metaphor of the two books as it was used by the fathers of the church up to the 17th century. According to the majority of the fathers, the book of nature is as universal as the book of scripture, and the content of each is to some extent equivalent. You can seek your way towards God by studying the Bible or by studying nature. They're both equally valid. There is a huge number of examples of this principle operating as modern science was developing in Europe. Some early European scientists, starting in the 16th century, were simply active Christian believers. But quite a few actually held formal church positions. For example, Gregor Mendel, the founder of genetics, and thus a huge contributor to the scientific foundation of the theory of evolution, was a monk all his life. He grew the peas from whose inherited properties he deduced the existence of genes in the garden of his monastery in Moravia, part of today's Czech Republic. Georges Lemaitre, the brilliant originator of the Big Bang theory, as well as several other key concepts in astrophysics, was a Belgian Catholic priest who studied for the priesthood at the same time he studied physics and mathematics, and all in Catholic institutions. James Clerk Maxwell, who worked in Scotland in the 19th century, is another striking example. He's not a church, didn't have a church role, but was a very active Christian. Within science, he unified our understanding of electricity, magnetism, and light in terms of electromagnetic waves, among other things showing that all three travel at the speed of light. His work was transformational within physics. Here's how he was viewed by Albert Einstein. It's quite vivid. Einstein, when he visited the University of Cambridge in 1922, this is a historical description, was told by his host that he had done great things because he stood on Newton's shoulders. Newton was at Cambridge, right? So Einstein came to Cambridge. He was told that he was standing on Newton's shoulders. There was Cambridge in the history of science. Einstein replied, "No, I don't. I stand on the shoulders of Maxwell." I mean, that's where he placed Maxwell. He is often regarded as in the top trio of physicists, Newton, Einstein, and Maxwell. Most important for our purposes is Maxwell's religious faith, which was important to him throughout his life. And much has been written about it. Here's a broad description of Maxwell's faith from a detailed biographical study published just recently. His emphasis in relating science and faith is in science's enhancement of our wonder at the glory of creation. Wonder at the glory of creation. Is this not very much in the spirit of the opening words of Rabindranath Tagore? Light, as the radiant energy of creation, started the ring dance of atoms in a diminutive sky, and also the dance of the stars in the vast, lonely theater of time and space. Now, as I think about the description of Maxwell's way of looking at science, its enhancement of our wonder at the glory of creation. I see the doing of science as a spiritual practice, not just an activity that is consistent with a separate spiritual life, but as an activity that itself has spiritual dimensions. To me, there is profound wisdom in the place of science in the practice of Hinduism, as we heard from Alok Kumar, and in the concept of the book of nature, a companion to the book of scripture that prevailed in Christianity for 1,000 years. So let's now look back once again at the message I have tried to deliver this morning. The title I chose is We Are All One. The reasoning behind the title is that three of the world's major traditions searching for the highest possible understanding of Hinduism, the Abrahamic traditions with a focus on Christianity, and modern science agree on two central points. There is a single origin for everything there is, and the most fundamental nature of everything there is the same. The details taught by the three systems differ, of course. The non-dual systems tell us that the most fundamental nature of everything is Brahman. The dual systems tell us that the most fundamental nature of everything is that it is God's creation. Science tells us that the most fundamental nature of everything is that everything is composed of the array of particles that arose stepwise out of the Big Bang and whose interactions are governed by a unified set of laws. Nevertheless, all three systems teach us that the fundamental nature of everything that exists is the same. Many scientists might place more emphasis on diversification and prefer a phrase like, we are all part of a single system. But even in science, unity is a highly direct message. And my closing words are again those of Alan Lightman, the final words of his brilliant book, The Transcendent Brain, Spirituality in the Age of Science. And some of you may recognize them because I read them at a course. So what he wrote. I will end with a final portrait of spiritual materialism as I see it. There is very good scientific evidence that all of the atoms in our bodies, except for hydrogen and helium, the two smallest atoms, were manufactured at the centers of stars. If you could tag each of the atoms in your body and follow them backward in time through the air that you breathed during your life, through the food that you ate, back through the geological history of the earth, through the ancient seas and soils, back to the formation of the earth out of the solar nebular cloud, and then out into interstellar space, you could trace each of your atoms, those exact atoms, to particular massive stars in the past of our galaxy. At the end of their lifetimes, those stars exploded and spewed out their newly forged atoms into space, later to condense into planets and oceans and plants and your body at this moment. Instead of going backward in time, let me go forward in time to my death and beyond. The atoms in my body will remain, only they will be scattered about. Those atoms will not know where they came from, but they will have been mine. Some of them will once have been the memory of my mother dancing the bossa nova. Some will once have been part of my hand. If I could label each of my atoms at this moment, imprint each with my social security number, someone could follow them for the next 1,000 years as they floated in air, mixed with the soil, became parts of particular plants and trees, dissolved in the ocean, and then floated again in the air. And some will undoubtedly become parts of other people. So we are literally connected to the stars where our atoms came from. And we are literally connected to the future generations of people. In this way, even in a material universe, we are connected to all things future and past. And this is very much like Maria Popova's dedication of the universe in verse, isn't it? For Emily, who returned her borrowed stardust to the universe too soon. And for me, beyond thinking of my beloved Yvonne, it is very close to saying we are all one. So thank you, everybody, and let's have a conversation.
John,
Yes.
very exciting, stimulating presentation this morning, and thank you. I think it reminds me of Lord Shiva making a Tandava Nritya we talk about. That's the spiritual dance we're talking about. A couple of things that come to my mind. You elucidated that so brilliantly this morning. A Sanskrit term that says, Ekam Sat Vipraha Bahuda Vadanti. The truth is only one. People call it by different names. Vipraha ones, people. And what it really means is with this brilliant presentation, it continues to inspire us to appreciate the variations in each one of us, knowing fully that all of us are part of the same family.
Yeah.
Every member of our family, John, is different, appearing in different ways. The behavioral patterns different. But the mother knows, the father knows that they're part and parcel of the same family.
Yeah.
The kind of love, compassion, caring that goes with that family members is automatic, regardless how that individual may behave or may not behave. So it's important for you, from your presentation, is for us to remember that fact and act exactly in that particular fashion. And finally, I want to conclude by saying is knowing all brilliant presentation that you had this morning, this for us, how insignificant we are as individuals. And we need to put our ego exactly where it belongs, in the dustbin. Thanks again, John.
And that dustbin will be holy because it is Brahman. Thank you, Shashi. Thank you. Yeah.
Johnny, wonderful. We both took that class from Chinmaya Mission on the creation suktas. And I think you gave a better picture and better understanding that all those classes, because that was way beyond my, and this one, I like the poetic and the literary approach that you took, which connects with me much more than just plain, Shastra or Vedic meanings. This is great. I thank you very much for. I want to listen to this one recording again, and then go back to that other class, recording of the other class, and see understanding that. Thank you. And you connected everything, and that is great. You said we are all one, but I went one step beyond that. Not only we are one, but our thoughts and our aspirations and much more than just the physical oneness. There's a oneness in that spirituality and mind and literature and science and all those things too.
Yes, that is also what Maria Popova said, and she included that in saying that this broad picture is impossible for us to really grasp. It's so all-inclusive that it's a challenge to really internalize it. We can say it intellectually, but to really internalize it is a hard thing. And that's, I think, what prompted her to write a book called The Universe in Verse, because to do it only intellectually only takes you so far. And then there has to be some other step that is an internal recognition step of some sort. Yeah.
Yeah, the practice I do, which is Sri Sri Ravi Shankar's breathing exercise. We are supposed to say so hum when we do some of the breathing, and that so now I'm going to add more meaning to that so hum. I usually look at the nature and say so hum, but this is more, I can expand that understanding a little bit more.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Hi, Johnny.
Hi, Anand.
How are you? That was a wonderful talk. So many different thoughts came to my mind. And, I'm always looking for ways and means of communicating all of these things to, as you know, 8 and 10-year-olds.
Yeah.
So one thing was, the way we started there was that with Vivekananda saying his very famous paragraph, each soul is potentially divine. The purpose, potentially divine, the purpose is to show this divinity and in life. And he goes on from there. I won't quote all the rest of it. But the point is that it is not that everybody is so great and good and so on. People are different, but they have the potential to be God-like, if you want to call it that.
Mm-hmm.
And that is our purpose. That is our mission in life, is to exhibit that divinity that is within us.
Yeah.
So yes, the way I ended up saying it there was that, yes, we are one. But we can be one. Not that we absolutely are one at this moment. But we can all, by taking the right actions and so on and so forth, become good people. Whether you believe in God or not, it all depends. So that was one thing. The other thought that came to my mind was that you are really talking about two very fundamental questions. One is, how many ultimate realities are there? Science is looking for it, an answer. All the Hindu different philosophies, whether it is dualism or not, they have suggested answers. And I know nothing about Christianity, but I imagine that Christianity and other religions are attempting to answer that same question. How many of these ultimate realities are there, and what is their nature? So, right. So, for example, from an Advaita point of view, we end up saying there is one called Brahman, right? If it is in fact true that our universe is nothing but an oscillating universe, oscillating in perpetuity, maybe there is none. Maybe this was always like this. The Big Bangs were happening every so often, right? Or Sankhya philosophy says that there was, Prakriti, the material aspect, and infinitely many Purushas. So, I mean, or the duality of Prakriti and Brahman. So that is, I thought you were kind of answering that question of how many ultimate realities are there and what is their nature, or is the truth more like pantheism? So that's one aspect of it. And the other is how, second question to me that I thought was very important that you were talking about was, how was this universe created? Is this universe Brahman itself, as Advaita says, or was it created, as apparently Christianity says, and even Sankhya philosophy in a way says? And if it was created, what was it created from? So, what is the material cause of the universe, right?
Yeah.
It's like the creation of a potter, the multiple pots that a potter creates. And then to say that those pots have the potter in them. I mean, to the extent the potter is captured inside the pots is the amount by which God is captured inside the universe. If God created the universe out of a different material cause than God itself. So I thought that what you were talking about today went to the core of these philosophies and raised so many different questions. So it was just great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Namaste, Johnny.
Oh, Ram.
Excellent presentation. As usual, you come up with the beautiful words and connections to science and spirituality. And I like the topic, we are one. And we are all interconnected. We are all interdependent in this universe. And then come back to all this science and everything, whichever short span, as Dr. Sanya says, where we are a little speck. And then our life is little speck. So the question is how we want to live this life based on whatever the knowledge our scriptures are given or based on our own experience. And it comes down to how we want to live this life, because we are made up of this Panch Mahabhut, which whole universe is material as well as non-material world. But coming down to, as Dr. Sane says, we have to get rid of this ego, ahankar. And comes back the word love. And most of the religions have accepted the word love. Whatever the definition they give is different, but the unconditional love for each other comes down to it. Not the selfish love to get something by, but the unconditional love like a mother's or whatever you want to say. So thank you very much getting us educated more and more.
It was a big homework assignment.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'd like to know more about theory of involution, which is basically Sankhya philosophy. Vivekananda has written a lot about it, and then Sri Aurobindo, he has written a lot about it. And its involution is like how the Ishvara or Brahma ingests himself into the material, right? And then the evolution starts.
Yeah, that's something that I have not encountered, so I have no thoughts about that, with perhaps one exception, and that is that if you look just at the material world and you grapple with the origin of life, that has been a major challenge within science, basically ever since European science flowered in the 18th, 19th centuries. And it was enough of a challenge that there was a period within science that proposed that there is some sort of non-material entity that is the essence of life that became associated with the material. That was abandoned after some period of time, but it's a reflection of the fact that looking from within science, it's not a simple thing to resolve. The closest that we are now, to the best of my knowledge, is that it has been quite possible to synthesize all the major molecules that characterize living systems, like RNA and DNA and proteins and lipids and this is that and that is, to bring them into existence under physical conditions that are believed to be very much like what prevailed on planet Earth at about the time that life originated here. To assemble those components into a system that we would call living, that has not been accomplished. But there are serious efforts in that direction to show how the physical properties of matter, of chemical compounds, are of such a kind that if the conditions are appropriate, then systems that we now call living systems will emerge. But it has not been done, and whether it will succeed in being done, nobody knows. And how that would relate to Vivekananda's thinking, which of course was a century ago, and it didn't include contemporary science, I think that's an interesting question. You know, if he were with us today, what would he be saying? I don't know.
Yeah, but his writings are there, and so is Sri Aurobindo.
Well, yeah, to be sure, but those writings were created in a certain time period. Had the same people with the same minds and sensitivities, if they were with us today, what would they say today? I mean, we have no answer to that, but I think that's always an intriguing question, you know, that the language that people use to describe important ideas and principles is a reflection of the intellectual environment of the times when they are speaking and writing. And if you move them by a century, that environment is different. And I think you need to suppose that in a different environment, they would be using different words, and the specifics of what they are trying to say, or the examples that they might offer, things of that sort, might very well be different. And it's intriguing to try to imagine what it might be like. You know, if you start with a grand principle and you're trying to demonstrate that it works, that it's really applicable, and you're doing it in 2050, you would probably keep the same print. Even if you kept the same principle, you would probably give your explanations in a different way. This is what I'm thinking.
So I think if Jesus was born not today, he will say, no, it was not created in 6 days. Right? God would have told him something different, so the things will keep changing. And all the books were written, they would have been different today, right? Because they were just saying,
Yeah,
or
that's
writing what they thought is right in that time, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's I mean that that's just my personal way of approaching ancient writings is that they contain immense wisdom, but the way that wisdom is expressed and illustrated would be different had those same books with the same insight been written today and not 2000 years ago. Right? So even if you were speaking of Brahman, if you well, let's not I don't want to go there. Because I haven't thought it through. But there are the more specific an explanation is, the more subject to change with time, I would say. The general concepts remain with us, but the way in which they are set to manifest changes with our increasing understanding of the material world.
Johnny?
Yes.
I mean, obviously, we are speculating when we're trying to answer that question. But what I'm saying is, in response to the question, the answer will remain the same. Only things to explain the same answer, the examples that will be given at that time will be appropriate for those time periods. That's the only thing I see the difference. The truth will remain the same, but as they will express it, communicate it, clarify it, for that political generation in 2050 may be different.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, Johnny, this was an absolutely exquisite presentation, and this latest way of approaching it leads me to what I want to say to you. I love the fact that you have taken these different thoughts from different eras and different minds and brought them together for us. And that I'm hoping that you will put this into print so that it can live beyond the existence of the tape from presentation.
I fully support that. I think I told you that I wanted to revisit this video again, but written material will be great.
Wow. I'm starting to blush.
Johnny, do
Yes,
we
please.
have, I want to echo that, but I wonder if, do we have time for one more comment question?
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if you have anything to say about dualism versus non-dualism in science, because, the scientific method is often presumed to be, based on this division between knower and known. But more recently, some scientists have complicated that picture, or I should say in recent decades. And I think there's still scientists who would adhere to it. But I wonder if you're sensing any sort of non-dualistic trend in science, or if you think of science as non-dualistic or dualistic. I'd be interested to hear.
Yeah, there's a challenge. What your question brings to mind, Gene, is the whole matter of quantum physics to the very, very, very limited extent that I understand it, where it is said, as I understand it, that the outcome of test situations depends on the experimenter. So that there is not a wall between the object being studied and the studier. There's an interaction between the two. And I know that absolutely brilliant physicists have carried this quite far and made quite sweeping statements. I don't know, I don't understand it deeply enough to attempt to rephrase it. But I think you're right that there is an aspect of science in which that traditional separation, that 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 unbreakable dualism it's not operating anymore. There are other ways beyond that are much more practical that I think anybody who's a scientist would recognize. So when you do research, you ask a question, you have to frame a question, and you design some experiments to try to answer, come up with some answers. Well, where did the question come from? Right? It came from something within you that prompted you to ask that particular question in the particular way that you did. So you are part of the investigation, right? You are not a totally independent observer, because somebody else working in the same domain might approach it in a different way. Right? And we know that, and we recognize it. And that is one of the many reasons why teamwork in science has been expanding, because people recognize that moving forward is at least partially dependent on a point of view. And the more points of view you have, the better your chances of moving forward in a constructive direction. So at least in that sense, there is a duality a non-duality in the process. Now, if you were to ask most scientists about something metaphysical, I think most would say the science that we know does not include it. Or that it is, it's the traditional phrase, the God of the gaps. Things we don't understand, we attribute to something metaphysical that does it on its own. And the more we understand, the fewer gaps there are, right? That's the assertion. And probably in the history of science, there's a lot to be said for that. But then again, there are so many absolutely brilliant scientists who have in their own lives bridged science and some kind of metaphysical faith. And one of them that is well, there are many that were quite striking, but one who's particularly impressive to me is John Polkinghorne. He was a absolutely brilliant quantum physicist in England. He was regarded as perhaps the greatest quantum physicist in England of his era. He was at Cambridge. I have a good friend who was one of his last PhD students. And at one point, he stepped back from science. He gave up his professorial position at Cambridge. He went to seminary and became an Anglican priest. And he has written widely on why he did this and how he sees the relationship between spirituality and science. And here's a little book titled Quantum Physics and Theology, subtitle An Unexpected Kinship. And that's the perspective that he has been advancing. Well, I'll just read you the opening sentence. People sometimes think that it is odd or even disingenuous for a person to be both a physicist and a priest. It induces in them the same sort of quizzical surprise that would greet the claim to be a vegetarian butcher. Yet to someone like myself, who is both a scientist and a Christian, it seems to be a natural and harmonious combination. The basic reason is simply that science and theology are both concerned with the search for truth. In consequence, they complement each other rather than contrast one another. And then he goes on. And so this softening of the boundaries, I think is quite widespread.